Yeah, don't you think? I mean, it's been so difficult over the years where people have tried to relate law and spirit and have come up short. It's a challenging subject, but so often we hear of a law gospel distinction or even a law gospel hermeneutic. And by that, some people just mean something as basic as monergism versus synergism. The law is synergistic, meaning I work for my salvation. And then the gospel is monergistic, meaning God does it. So on that front, if that's all you mean by law gospel, then every Calvinist, has to have a distinction between law and gospel because we're not saved by our own works. We're not saved by anything that we do, but we're saved by Jesus Christ alone and by grace through faith in him. And obvious, but that's not what we're often talking about when we're talking about a law gospel distinction, because most people that are using that term in a more advanced way, not just a simple monergism synergism comparison, are speaking about the law as the period of covenantal history from Moses unto Christ, or Moses at least to the exile. So when we're talking about the nation of Israel living under the law, is there an antithesis or some sort of head-to-head competition between what God is doing in the law with what he's doing in the gospel? And if you subscribe to the Westminster Standards, you must say no, because the law is an administration of the covenant of grace, or we might say the old covenant is an administration of the covenant of grace, but it's in a different mode. It's through promises, types, sacrifices.
It's a distinct
Yes,
administration
precisely.
of the one covenant of grace. And I think there's confusion in many people's minds. People can think of law and gospel, if you're not careful, in terms of two contrasting ways of gaining salvation.
Right.
One synergistic, based on human effort, the other monergistic, based simply or exclusively on faith.
Right.
And so that kind of contrast, which is, I think, predominant within Lutheran readings, we can look at that and say, well, listen, before we start talking in that way, let's broaden out and make sure that when we talk about the classical and most foundational way that the Reformed have spoken about law and gospel, law is an earlier Old Covenant administration of the covenant of grace. Gospel is a later New Covenant administration of the same covenant of grace, the
Indeed.
same in substance, different in administration.
Mm-hmm.
And once you realize that, then the question is, what's the difference in administration? Well, it's predominantly this. The Old Covenant is administered, covenant of grace, the law, in promises, types, and sacrifices that prefigure, typify, foresignify, and in our language, pre-enact
Mm-hmm.
the climactic redemption that will come in the advent, crucifixion, and ascension of the promised Messiah. And once you start to see that, you start to realize that the contrasts that are being drawn are within the history of salvation, not
Yes.
the application of it in
Right.
some narrow way. And the movement is from, if you can think of the Abrahamic promise, the movement is from a typico-symbolic fulfillment of the
Mm-hmm.
Abrahamic promises
Mm-hmm.
to the climactic eschatological fulfillment in the crucified and ascended Messiah. So it's a kind of twofold movement of the fulfillment of the Abrahamic promise.
Right.
And the law is not, as an administration in redemptive history, is not able to bring to consummate fruition the promises given to Abraham, because for those to come to fruition, you need a crucified, ascended seed of Abraham, who is a second and last Adam,
Yeah.
life-giving spirit, the man of heaven.